So welcome to the final session of this year's Theatre of War Symposium. And it's fitting that we conclude this year's symposium with one of our foremost artists and playwrights. Marina Carr's relationship with the Abbey began in 1991 when Ullaloo premiered in the Peacock Theatre. Actually, that's roughly when we met, was it? Around that?
Well, a bit before.
Bit before.
We met in the project.
Oh, we met in the
yeah, where all the tinkers meet.
We're all. That's right. Actually, yeah, we won't go there. But I know Marina a long time, both as a friend and as an artist. Since then, the Abbey has produced many of her plays, including The May, By the Bog of Cats, Portia Coughlin, Ariel, Woman and Scarecrow, Marble, and 16 Possible Glimpses. That's a lot so far, isn't it? Yeah. We're delighted, of course, to be presenting a revival of one of her seminal works, By the Bog of Cats, on this Abbey stage in August of this year. It'll be directed by Selena Cartmel, and it'll star one of our great Irish actors, Susan Lynch. So that's coming up. Marina is one of the strongest and the most idiosyncratic voices in Irish theatre, blending as she does an intrinsic awareness of the Irish tradition with a timeless sense of theatre archetypes. Her plays engage with the elemental, the primal, channeling the eternal conflicts of classical theatre through the struggles of characters that inhabit cities, towns, and rural wastelands of contemporary Ireland. Whether dealing with the family, sex, love, the body politic, or the artist's process, a keen insight into the human condition and the nature of conflict lends her subject, weight, and moment. Over the past decades, she has provided Irish theatre with an alternative voice, a distinct voice. The nation's unexpressed subliminal passions and fears are given voice in the plays that deal with that, which is so often suppressed by the numbing banalities of the everyday. She has also provided Irish theatre with some of its most memorable women characters, women who rage and struggle against a fate beyond their control. And so I'm delighted to welcome Marina to the Theatre of War Symposium to speak to us about the manifestations of women in war to the lens of art and beauty. We welcome Marina Carr.
Hello, everybody. So, art, beauty, war is the topic for today. So I'm going to give a few very simplistic definitions. It's more for my own clarity than yours, so forgive me if they're too simplistic. So we start with art. So art is created when an artist creates a beautiful object or produces a stimulating experience that is considered by the audience to have artistic merit. It's considered collectively. That's important. Theatre, from theatron, to behold. Another etymology of theatron is the divine made visible, so going right back to the Greeks. Beauty. In Greek, beauty is kalos. Another meaning, or another Greek word that is similar to kalos is koine, which is of the hour. So beauty, that definition in Greek, the definition of beauty encompasses that meaning of the hour, the time being ripe, being of the moment. It involves things like symmetry and proportion. So it's not your 21st century definition of beauty, although it incorporates that at times, but it's not just that. War. Collective violence or intervention between political communities. Again, the etymology, Old English, it's wir, W-I-R-R-E. Old German, it's Verwirren, V-E-R-W-I-R-R-E-N. Old French, it's wer. Frankish, it's wera. The Old German Verwirren also is cognate with to confuse or to perplex. In ancient Greek, it's barbarous. In Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, it's guerra. Etymological legend has it that the ancient peoples, the precursors to those who spoke the Romance languages, adopted the Germanic werin because they wanted to avoid using the Latin bellum, their word for war. The reason they wanted to avoid using the word bellum was because when pronounced, bellum sounded too much like bellow, which means beautiful. I just thought that was a very interesting thing. A couple of things. War before civilization, the experts tell us, Professor Keeley among them says that approximately 90 to 95% of known societies engaged in at least occasional warfare, and many fought constantly. Since the late 18th century, more than 150 conflicts and about 600 battles have taken place. A couple of figures. World War II, I find this a really odd figure. Between 60 and 85 million died in World War II. One wonders what happened to that 15 million they can't account for. I mean, it's an incredible. 13th century, 60 million in the Mongol invasion and conquests. 1850 in the Taiping Rebellion, 40 million. It goes on. World War I, 39 million. The Anchi Rebellion in 755, none of us remember that, 36 million. The Second Sino-Japanese War, 1937 to 1945, 20 million. And it goes on, Tamburlaine, 20 million, and the figures go on. So how does art fare in the time of war? Well, with the displacement and movement of peoples, artists among them, it doesn't fare very well. So there's cultural desecration, really, at time of war. It's also not uncommon during war that cultural institutions, libraries, museums, theatres would be seen as targets of war in themselves. To destroy these art institutions was seen and is seen as a way to denigrate, demoralise and humiliate the enemy population. So it's important that we treasure these institutions, I suppose, so we don't repeat ourselves. Motivations for war, again, there are many, but the big three seem to be economics, power and religion. They're different causes, they change, but what stays the same, and is probably the prime motivation since time began, is that there's trained, organised violence ready to go, i.e. armies, with one aim, destruction of lives and territory. That's their raison d'etre. What the psychoanalysts say, war is often a mass discharge of accumulated internal rage. Others argue we are inherently violent. This inherent violence is fueled by displacement and projection, where we transfer our own bias and hatred and existential unhappiness and despair onto other races, religions, and nations. So if war is innate then, well, there's very little hope of us ever escaping it. It seems like it's here with us. Melanie Klein and Franco Fornari think that war is the paranoid projection, the elaboration or physical outlet for mourning. And that ties in with something Darian Leader speaks about in The New Black about depression. He talks about art, and the function of art is to mourn and to grieve. So if the function of war is to mourn and to grieve, an outlet for that, they're very akin again. The Italian psychoanalyst Fornari thinks that war develops out of our love need, a wish to preserve or defend the sacred object to which we're attached, the mother, or what stands for the mother. For the adult, the nation becomes the sacred object. And Fornari focuses on sacrifice as the essence of war. He talks about the astonishing willingness to sacrifice ourselves for the country, the motherland, the fatherland, to give over the body to the nation, to religion or whatever. It seems the population are more neutral towards war, but are drawn in by leaders who have what Morris Walsh calls an abnormal disregard for human life. John T. Flynn, American congressman, says, the enemy aggressor is always pursuing a course of larceny, murder, rapine, and barbarism. We're always moving forward with high mission, a destiny imposed by the deity, to regenerate our victims while incidentally capturing their markets. That we civilize savage and senile and paranoid peoples while blundering accidentally into their oil wells. Now that was said in the 40s. Another theory of the youth bulge theory, basically. This is Samuel Huntington. He says, generally speaking, the key factor is the demographic, and generally the people who go out and kill other people are males between the ages of 16 and 30. So in youth bulge theory, 30 to 40% of males of a nation belong to the fighting age, 15 to 29. Religion and ideologies are seen as secondary factors that are used to legitimate violence, but they're secondary. They won't lead to violence if you don't have the youth bulge, i.e. young males with nothing to do of fighting age. Now, after those little digressions, there are just some definitions to set us up a bit. Now we come to our Greek women. First, I want to give you a few definitions of women from the Greeks. So Xenophon, he thought females possessed the positive traits of vigilance and love for infants. But he also feared them because of their irrationality, their religious fervour, and their sexual passion. Aristotle went a little bit further. He said that women are deformed, incomplete males, designed to be subservient to men. This will be important later when we get to the humanities, if we ever do get to the humanities. Socrates thought that the impersonation of inferiors, such as women and slaves, was morally harmful. He also worried about the ethical damage caused by the representation of womanish emotions in tragedy. Plato excludes poetry embodied by the figure of a woman from his ideal city-state. So in ancient Greece, a woman was viewed as a passive conduit of male fertility on long-term loan to her husband by her father, pretty much. Marriage was an unequal relationship. The husband owned the children. He didn't have the same obligation of fidelity that his wife had. So I suppose Alcestis would have been the model Greek wife. She literally gives her life for her husband so he can live. Medea would have been the direct opposite. So she chooses her own husband. She reacts savagely against his infidelity. She breaks the female template. She kills her children, his children, legally. Essentially, she's a woman who behaves like a man. Medea in Greek, one of the meanings is cunning. It is also the name the Greeks used for the Persians, the Medeas, one of their most feared enemies. So Medea is a male at heart, or she has the attributes of the male that the Athenians of 5th century BC admired and extolled. She's courageous, intelligent, decisive, resourceful, powerful, independent. She can conceive and carry out a plan effectively. She's also a wonderful rhetorician. These were qualities much revered and prized in Athens at the time. Qualities considered to be the ideal attributes of the Athenian male. And good old Euripides gives them to Medea. You have to wonder, is he the first feminist? To live with honour and to die with honour, this was the territory of the male in Athens, 5th century BC. It was never meant to apply to women. It must have struck terror into the hearts of the audience who first saw Medea performed. Aeschylus also gives these male qualities to Clytemnestra in the Oresteia. The first play of the Oresteia trilogy is called Agamemnon, but it is essentially Clytemnestra's story we follow. She's the heartbeat of the play, as she is of the trilogy. She's the one we've to thank for the birth of law, as shown in the humanities, the law courts, the jury, the law and all its paradoxes and weakness and fallibility and sometimes justice. So Clytemnestra, she's a child of Sparta. And let us never forget how much the Greeks hated the Spartans and feared them. She's the daughter of King Tyndareus and Leda of Sparta. Her sister is Helen. And she marries into the House of Atreus. Now, the House of Atreus is, as Robert Fagel says in his essay, The Serpent and the Eagle, the House of Atreus is the embodiment of savagery. No other house can rival it for accumulated atrocities. The first member of this famed house is Tantalus of Lydia, a barbarian whose spirit haunts the Oresteia. he cooked up his son and fed him to the gods. Well, if he did, the gods punished him by sending him to Hades, condemned to starve with the most magnificent banquet of food and wine in front of him, but just out of reach. Hence, to tantalizing. The gods brought his son Pelops back to life, and Pelops had two sons, Atreus and Thyestes. Atreus is the father of Agamemnon. So Thyestes seduced his brother Atreus' wife, and Atreus found out and banished him, but not before serving up Thyestes' two sons in the good old family tradition, up in the stew again, serve them to the father. Thyestes finds out about this, curses Atreus and all his descendants. This is the curse of the House of Atreus, before going into exile again with his remaining son Aegisthus. His remaining son Aegisthus is the son, he has this son with his daughter. I mean, they're incredibly, goes on and on. So this same Aegisthus is the one that Clytemnestra takes as a lover when Agamemnon goes to the war. And it's part of her first revenge, really. But before he heads for Troy, Agamemnon, he's something he has to do. He has to sacrifice his daughter on the altar. So the wind will change and blow favourably for the black ships to set sail for Troy. Now, versions vary, but one of them is that the black ships are stranded on the rocky shore of Aulis. There they are, restless, bored, and they're threatening to call off the war. The war, after all, is the pursuit of a phantom. They're going to get Helen back, Helen, the wife of Menelaus, who's the brother of Agamemnon. It's a family affair, or is it? Some sources say that Helen was never taken by Paris, that Helen was never in Troy, that Helen was a reason invented to go to war. Anyway, there they all are, sweltering on the beach, and someone decides a sacrifice must be made to appease Artemis, because Agamemnon had killed a deer in a grove that was sacred to her. So Calchas the seer is called in, and he says, yes, you must sacrifice your daughter Iphigenia for this transgression, and then the wind will uncam or unfurl or blow or whatever it's meant to do. So Aulis is a famously windy place. So whatever the wind in Greek plays, it's very hard to figure out what it's meant to be doing, blowing or not blowing. So Agamemnon refused at first, but the army put pressure on him. So you see the symmetry here again. Roberto Calasso, in his book, The Marriage of Cadmus and Harmony, writes beautifully about this. I recommend you all read this book. The Trojan War begins with the sacrifice of a girl, as it ends with the sacrifice of a girl, Polyxena, the Trojan princess, daughter of Priam and Hecuba. Agamemnon is present at both. He's the leader, the commander. Nothing happens without his say. It's important to remember, too, that Agamemnon was also a Spartan. And to reiterate how much the Greeks hated the Spartans. I always think Agamemnon got bad press. I have great affection for Agamemnon. I know he does some terrible things, but there's also some fantastic qualities in him. Okay, so the story goes, Agamemnon lures Iphigenia, his daughter, from Mycenae by telling his wife Clytemnestra that Iphigenia is to be married to Achilles. So later in Hecuba, we'll see that the ghost of Achilles is used again as the reason for the sacrifice of Polyxena, that the ghost of Achilles is haunting the Trojan shore, saying he didn't get enough tribute. He wants Polyxena down with him in Hades. So for the House of Atreus, the killing of children goes on to the next generation. Children end up served up to the gods, etc. So Iphigenia is sacrificed, the wind duly blows or doesn't blow or changes direction, whatever it has to do, and the black ships head for Troy, and time passes. 10 years. We don't know how much time passes. Somewhere in one of the things I read, I've forgotten the source, I'm dreadful on sources, but it's something about 10 years being cognate in ancient Greek with a long time. So we don't know, was it 10 years? Anyway, a long time passes, long enough for Clytemnestra to grieve and rage the shock of it. Your husband, father of your children, takes your eldest daughter under the guise of marriage and lays her on an altar in front of the Greek army, bears her to the waist. He has to be able to get at her throat. You have to imagine this to understand everything Clytemnestra subsequently does. Your daughter half naked on the makeshift stones at Aulis, the sea, like glass 10,000 war machines, watching, not a breath, the horror, the terror. Did the girl struggle? What was that look exchange between her and her father as he held the knife? Did she speak? Did he speak? Was it messy? Is it very difficult to kill someone? I mean physically. I'm not talking about emotionally or mentally. I mean physically. Is it very difficult to kill someone? How much strength does it take? How long did it take her to die? Did no one cry out? Was Clytemnestra watching? Legend has it she was there with her infant son Orestes, who watched. And who watched this? Who allowed this? Was it evening? Was it morning? Were the stars out? Did the wind arrive as the last breath left the girl's body? Did the wind not arrive? It's one of the most terrifying, haunting moments in the history of, forget about theatre, in the history of people, and what we can conjure up and dream up and do to one another. Its backdrop, of course, it's war. A war ostensibly to restore and guard the honour of Greek women. Never mind that Greek didn't exist then, there were just factions of warring tribes. A chivalrous war if glanced at from the outside. But a little scratch below the surface, and what you probably find is a youth bulge. Young men with nothing to do. What you probably find is a savage invasion and destruction of an ancient civilization by disparate tribes of barbarians, the Greeks. What you probably find, as Calasso points out, is human sacrifice, female human sacrifice, young female human sacrifice, which bookends the war. Iphigenia to begin it, Polyxena to finish it. Terrifying. Symmetry of terrifying beauty. Yeats talks about terrible beauty being born. It's that kind. That's what he's talking about. Pity and terror are the emotions we experience, according to Aristotle, when we witness a dramatic event of great artistic power. Pity and terror. This apparently causes catharsis. I have huge problems with catharsis. Actually, I don't understand catharsis. But anyway, we're talking about Greeks. Apparently, the human soul is purged of its excessive passions. I don't think you'll ever purge us of them, to be honest, okay? By watching or witnessing tragic art. Tragic art is about excess. It's about transgression. Well, certainly Clytemnestra is about transgression, as is Hecuba, as is Medea, as is Antigone. Anyway, we're going back to Clytemnestra. So she's seething in Mycenae as her husband Agamemnon swanks off to the wars in his black ships and the wind at his tail. And as she seethes, her children grow, Orestes, Electra, Chrysothemis, the ghost of Iphigenia haunting the place. She takes Aegeus as the lover. She's 3 kids with him. Now, remember the relationship between Aegeus and Agamemnon, cousins who hate each other. You know, feud, war to the death. So this is kind of her first. This is the first part of her revenge on Agamemnon. Just marry his enemy. So she's waiting for Agamemnon's return. At the beginning of Agamemnon, the watchman is there and the fires. The fires are finally lit. And the news comes, they've got the news. Troy has fallen. The Greeks have won. They're on the way home. And this feeds into 5th century BC and how plays were performed. It's amazing for us to imagine how it all began, how drama, birth of all of that. So they're performed at the Festival of Dionysus. Many of you know this, but I just find it fascinating. The word tragedy, goat song, or grape harvest song. So the plays were performed over 4 days, every spring. There would have been 14,000 to 15,000 spectators at all of these performances. Fiach, eat your heart out. I eat my own heart out. 14 to 15. 15,000. No, it's 16 shows. It's over 4 days. They began at dawn. So, for example, when the fires from Mount Ida are seen at the beginning of Agamemnon, the sun is literally rising in the amphitheatre. Everybody's there at dawn. So the fires are lit, the sun is rising. It's just beautiful confluence of nature and art, theatre. 3 tragedies were performed on each of the 4 days. Three tragedies and then 1 satire play. They also used to parade all the war orphans around the theatre children whose fathers had been killed in the battle the previous year. And let's remember, there was always a battle. This was an institution. War was an institution. The battle season had to happen between spring and August, or spring and September. So it had to happen after the sowing and before the harvest. That was your battle season. You do all your killing, your raping, your plundering, your butchery. They were the months you had. Then you'd come home, you'd sow the crops, or harvest the crops, and whatever, get fat for the winter, whatever, and then get ready, train up for the next season. Meat was cooked at these theatre festivals. Ancient Greeks ate very little meat. For many, and this is probably the only time of the year that eat a bit of meat. And the detail I love, if you wrote a good play, you might be in for getting a prize. But if you wrote a bad one, you had to pay a fine. So nothing has changed on that front. I mean, critics, it seems, have always been swift and merciless in their judgments on playwrights. Maybe they were Irish critics who went over to Greece, I don't know. The actors were all men. They wore masks and platform shoes for the height. Remember, they had to be seen and heard by 14 to 15,000 people. The voice training must have been superlative. The chorus sang and danced their parts. The word chorus, again, comes from the Greek for dance. Anyway, back to Clytemnestra. She's been stewing for 10 years or a long time. The people's darling, that's what she calls Agamemnon. So she's waiting for him. She has her tapestries of crimson. She has her silver bath. No, not an ordinary bath, a silver bath. She has her plan. And Agamemnon arrives in his chariot, with Cassandra on his arm, if you don't smile, his spear prize. And even though she's taken up with Aegisthus, his cousin and arch enemy, this galls her. A younger woman, a princess of Troy, on the steps of her palace, but she controls herself. She declares to the crowd how she loves her husband. She has them spread the crimson tapestries. She says, let the red stream flow and bear him home, to the home he never hoped to see, justice lead him in. But before that, she says something to him so personal and almost an aside. She says, our child is gone, not standing by our side. The bond of our dearest pledges, mine and yours. By all rights, our child should be here. So, and then she goes on. For me, the tears that welled like springs are dry. I have no tears to spare. I had watched till late at night. My eyes still burn. I sobbed by the torch I lit for you alone. And it's heartbreaking. She's still reeling from the sacrifice, obviously. They're incredibly intimate words between a husband and wife, after all. There's great pity and understanding in them. Sympathy even for him and what he had to do. We don't know how much he wanted to do. I reckon who wants to kill their daughter? You think he was forced. He was forced. The army, the power balance. Keep the barbarians happy. They need a sacrifice. So all of that's in that speech. She pities him. She pities them for what he's done, what he needed to do, and what she is going to do to him. She says, come to me now, my dearest. Down from the car of war. Never set the foot that stamped out Troy on earth again, my great one. Zeus Agamemnon, she calls him. That's what he was known as, Zeus Agamemnon. He was the king of kings long before Alexander. And she persuades him, despite his better judgment, to trample the royal crimson, the tapestries that only the gods should walk on. He says, I'm no barbarian peacocking out of Asia, which is exactly what he is, actually, a barbarian peacocking out of Asia. But he's also more than that. He says, give me the tributes of a man, not a god, a little earth to walk on, not this gorgeous work. And Clytemnestra says, Priam, can you see him? If he had your success, Priam would have done it. So what she's saying is, you're not as good as Priam. You're not as big a king as Priam. Priam, if he had won the war, he would have walked on the gods' tapestries. And she has him, of course, his pride, his hubris, his vanity, all of that. So he says, right. He says, yeah, I see, striding on the tapestries of God, I see him now. Tides and tides of crimson dye, our robes blood red, she says to his retreating back. You wonder, is this the origin of what they call the red carpet treatment? Anyway, into the palace he goes, into his beautiful bathroom to wash the dirt and mire from the black ships, etc., and the salt sea from his hair and his beard. And she follows him in, presumably gets her Lydian double-bladed axe. Clytemnestra was a great one for her axe, you know, the double-bladed one. Apparently, her first husband apparently was from Lydia. Later in the second play, in The Libation Bearers, she will literally call for her axe. When Orestes is attacking her, she will call for her axe. So the axe was important to her. Anyway, we hear the roars of Agamemnon. 3 strokes it takes, the double-bladed axe. 3 strokes, a net and a silver bath. And you have the most magnificent, terrible murder scene ever written, ever portrayed on stage. Beautiful, beautiful in the Greek sense, in the original sense that it is of the hour, that the time is ripe, that he's getting his comeuppance, I suppose. That it happens off stage, I think, burns the image into us with all the more power. We're at 12:30. Are you okay? Okay. So Agamemnon in his silver bath. Oh yeah, sorry, but it happens off stage. But the doors swing open, and there he is. So in ancient Greek theatre, they had these kind of platforms, ekilema, I think you pronounce it. Platforms, anyway, that could be rolled out to display the aftermath of some event that had happened, not on off stage. So Agamemnon in his silver bath, the net trapped in the net, is wheeled out in one of these platforms. Cassandra's also dead beside him, and I suppose Clytemnestra's there, panting. I mean, she's after killing 2 people. It's hard work with an axe, covered in blood, sweating. Unrepentant. This is the thing, unrepentant. You have to put yourself there. 15,000 audience members, a dead king in a silver bath, net over him, his little concubine there. Clytemnestra standing there with her axe, blood dripping off her dress. And this is what she says. First of all, she goes for the chorus with the axe. This woman, this deformed, unfinished male, according to Aristotle, this chattel of her husband, legally with a status not much higher than a slave, and she's stalking the territory with the axe, going for the chorus. To go for the chorus is to go for the audience. The chorus represented for the people watching themselves. So it's an attack on the polis, it's an attack on the state, it's an attack on the people. She says, words, endless words I've said to serve the moment. Now it makes me proud to say it true. How else do you prepare a death for deadly men who seem to love you? How to rig the nets of pain so high no man can overleap them. And she goes on, I brooded on this trial, etc. I'll go forward anyway. And the chorus berate her, insult her, etc. She should dare the brazenness of her, holding her ground, brandishing her axe. It must have been absolutely shocking for Athenians to witness that for the first time. I mean, it's still kind of shocking. He's dead there in the bath. The mistress is dead, the net is there, the axe is in her hand. You know, I think it's still kind of, it's one of those images that are still detonating. For women, certainly. I don't know for men what that means for a man. But for a woman, that image detonates, or is still detonating. The power she takes, the responsibility, the grief. Now, she does behave horrifically, no one would deny that. She's terrifying. She's a taboo breaker. And it points to just how taboo breaking all the women in the Greek plays are. It seems that they're positioned at the outward reaches of femininity, kind of the outermost reach of what it is to be human. They seem to be all posited there in that age. If we've time, we'll come back to the amenities, but I just want to have a quick look at Hecuba, fabled queen of Troy. You tell me when to shut up, will you? The Phrygian horsewoman, the wife...
Shut up, but I'll tell you to shut up. I would
down.
never dare to do that on the Abbey stage.
Oh, God.
Censorship.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Fiach. So Priam, 50 children, legend has it, 18 of them were Hecubas. We last year in Thrace, they're all dead except Cassandra, who will shortly die in Mycenae. Priam is dead. I read somewhere, again, I've forgotten where, that Lear is Shakespeare's response to Hecuba. Or to put it another way, Lear is the male Hecuba. There are many parallels. You can see the influence of Hecuba on Lear. Both inhabit a haunted, malign universe. The gods are absent in both. Both had everything, both lose everything. One howling on the heath, the other on the shore, the children dead at their feet, never and nothing. That's their refrain, pain beyond pain. Both are pushed beyond the limits of what one might justly be asked to endure on what Sappho calls this black earth. And like Lear, Hecuba is not without her faults. She's proud, arrogant, she's used to adoration, the bended knee, the choicest dishes, her jewels, her dresses. She's the mother of warriors, the wife of Priam, with 50 rooms of gold piled high and forgotten. She's a queen. The Greeks called everyone except themselves barbarians. But as Kitto points out, they were the original barbarians. What they did at Troy was something more than war. It was the annihilation of an entire civilization. Now, we all know that history is written by the winners, but myths, I think, sometimes are too. I think Hecuba has suffered more than most in the Greek version of her myth. Polymestor at the end of the play says, you will climb the ship's mast, you will become a dog, your eyes blazing fire, and your tomb will be named Poor Bitch's Rock, a landmark for sailors. It's the final insult of many insults. But a little closer reading suggests Euripides' Hecuba may be propaganda for the polis, the stability of the state, a justification of what it means to be Greek. The Greeks were inventing themselves at the time. They were trying to start a country to define what it was to be human, to lay down the law, the qualities that were permissible and the qualities that were not. Hecuba is a salutary tale for all Greeks, men and women. She becomes a definition of the demarcation between human and savage. Hence, she's turned into a dog. Her tomb is to be called Poor Bitch's Rock. Nietzsche says about the Greeks that the reason they wrote all these plays and all these, the polis and endless talk about the good and right and not virtue and all of this was because they hadn't a clue what any of this was, and they so badly needed to learn. So it's at the birth of a civilization, the destruction of one and the birth of what we know. It's interesting that a lot of the women in the Greek plays are not Greek, they're outsiders, strangers, barbarians. If the fragile birth of the polis could not countenance any of the tribe having the qualities of Medea or Hecuba or Clytemnestra, the women who transgress, the women who have an answer for everything, women who've mastered the art of rhetoric, prized virtue, they're women who take and wield power, however fleetingly. This is very threatening to the state. Euripides' Hecuba, we meet her in Thrace. Again, the wind is acting up, not blowing or blowing too hard or blowing in the wrong direction. So the black ships are beached again. Again, you have to imagine the blistering heat, the sand, burning, relentless sun, scarcity of water and food, filthy ships. The survivors, the war wounded, the booty, the sack city, gold, diamonds, cattle, horses, goats, grain, chickens, and the women. One presumes the women left alive, the royal women, highly prized, the good-looking women, the women who are of childbearing age. There wouldn't have been many children. They'd have been sent off to slavery already. There'd been no infants, far too few resources to deal with that. So there they are. There'd be no Trojan men, too much of a threat. They're all dead in Troy. The burning city, high pink walls, gone, gone. And there's something about Troy, the image of it as a race, as us, as the human race. In a way, we all lost Troy. There's something about it. The feeling that that Bronze Age city held something beautiful and mysterious, something beautiful about us that we've forgotten or let go, that something sacred was buried there. If you believe in the spirit and what Yeats calls beautiful, lofty things, then we're all the poorer without Troy. It was called the City of Light. So anyway, there Hecuba is. Will I stop?
Yeah, wind down, yeah.
Will I wind down? But I have 45 pages to
Okay.
go. Okay, no, do you know what? No, I'm going to finish. I have to leave it there. So anyway, I just think Hecuba is very maligned and
You'll have to
wronged.
come back, Marina, okay? for
I
next
want to write an alternative Hecuba, but I want to finish on a lighter note, okay? Sappho, and I think it brings together art, beauty and war much better than I ever could, and it's a beautiful fragment. 6th century lyric poet. She's called the 10th Muse. And the poem is called The Most Lovely Thing. Some say that the most beautiful thing on this black earth is an army of horsemen. And some say it is a fleet of ships. But I say it is the face of the one you love. Easy to make this clear to all, for she who surpassed all in beauty, Helen, deserted her husband, sailed for Troy, did not think of her child, her parents. The goddess led her astray in love, which now puts me in mind of Anactoria, far away, her lovely way of walking and the bright radiance of her face. I would rather see than the Lydian chariots or fully armed infantry. Thank you very much for your patience.
So Marina will have to come back and finish that. Extraordinary, and it's the right ending to reminding ourselves of the challenge we took upon ourselves three days ago around the themes of the Theatre War Symposium, and particularly, as Jay Winter reminded us, the challenge of national exceptionalism. And what better than to leave the auditorium thinking of Troy and thinking of what we miss from Troy. But as long as artists like Marina Carr remind us of that subconscious that we have, the Troy that we have, I think that'll bring us certainly, maybe not into a huge future, but certainly into next year. So just very quickly, I want to thank all our delegates, all you, our audiences who have been supporting us, not only this year, but last year, and we look forward to seeing you again next year for our final symposium. And these symposia are here to, as an intellectual, an artistic pursuit, an engagement with I suppose, the difficulty that Park Gates spoke about, which is whether we should bother even commemorating the centenaries. But it is a way for us to angrily look at it sideways. And I hope you agree, the last 3 days was an extraordinary, refreshing, international, global and local look at whether it's in Palestine or Troy or Burundi, and I think, or indeed in Minsk. And I think that's what we try to create is that engagement between the artist and us, our audience, and politics, and most of all, the creation of art. So I'd like to thank, obviously, the staff of the Abbey Theatre. I'd like to thank the Ariadne Project. I'd like to thank my colleagues on the steering committee, Kelly Phelan, Dominic Campbell, and Aidan Howard, who helped myself dream up the composition of the second symposium. It's been an extraordinary 3 days, starting with Luke Gibbons and the kind of permission he's given artists. Not the permission, but the security, the pressure on artists to create work quickly after an event, and to caution and to maybe embrace belatedness. And I know that Ruwanti the Shakira from Sri Lanka spoke about that extraordinarily honestly, about whether creating work so soon after an event or waiting, and how one would have perspective around that is something I think a lot of artists brought with them. And it's no accident that we look to Troy and we look to the Greeks, we look to try and make sense of the contemporary sometimes. But that notion of belatedness, which actually Luke continued to talk about the idea of the mythic and the real, the incongruity of the mythic and the real, and how distance and space is required for artists to present work, and sometimes that work is written out of history in itself, whether it's the work of Emer O'Duffy, which he mentioned. And another example of that was Gowrie's wonderful reclaiming of James Cousins yesterday, an artist that was written out of history, written out indeed perhaps even the Abbey Theatre's history for a significant period of time, and his engagement with India, and his engagement with India back to Ireland. And I think that reclaiming of artists and artists' work, and the kind of importance of sustaining works like Cousins and re-embracing that work, I think is something that I'll bring with me too. Embeddedness is another thing. That extraordinary challenge from illumination of David Cotterell's work, and then the war correspondence performance we had around how do we tell our stories, and who's controlling that story, and inevitably around censorship, which was also I think Vladimir spoke about today through Skype and through translators as well. The displacement of art within conflict. Again, Marina picked up on that, the destruction of art as being the first port of call, and you can see that happening frankly, in our period of austerity. You know, they wanted to shut down our National Library, or they wanted to shut down our National Museum. They've starved us of funding. You know, it is no accident, in my view, that art is one of the first points of ravaging by government and states, whether it's at war or in periods of austerity, and that's something we need to look at. Again, great discussions yesterday around boundaries and physical boundaries, administrative boundaries. Ray Dolphin started that off, but then hearing Amir's conversation and Stacey's wonderful play we saw yesterday, Shibboleth, and the various different, and her love of Belfast, and Brendan Brown's love of Belfast. And I also thought that Anne Dolan gave us an opportunity to relook at and maybe sidetrack centenaries and talk about something like history of violence, which is again something that some of Marina's work deals with in a non-chronological way, to avoid this what Anne spoke about, which is the chronological convenience of the decade of centenaries, and to look at maybe in a different way. And I think her extraordinary, important intervention yesterday, I think, is something that we can remunerate on. So I want to just thank all our international guests. A lot of them have been here for the first time in Dublin. I hope you all have had an engagement with our city and with our culture and with our theatre artists here. And I hope to see you all next year. Gramila Magaf.